Thank you, everyone, for accommodating. I have pleasure. I have the pleasure to introduce Siva, who is the Cloud Operations Manager for Enlyte, and he would be taking us to a journey for workspace transformation that we have. And over to you, Siva, on that.
Okay, let's go to slide number 2. Okay, so yeah, we are Enlyte. We used to be Mitchell. We are a kind of a merger acquisition company. We look for opportunity to grow in the industry, and then that's what our leadership do. So and this gives you the path what we have done in the past several years. So I just want to give you information about who we are. So and then I will dive deep into one of the topics. And Manish, if you can go to the next one, please.
Sure.
Okay. This is Workspace. It's very near and dear to me. I joined this company 4 years ago. Fifth year is starting in a few days. Workspace was one of the key item initiative that I was working on. So we are currently going through a transformation of moving into cloud from on-prem, and this was one of the major items that we did. It was a long time ago, which was with another migration from Coventry. So we acquired it, and then Coventry is fully in cloud, and Workspaces, as you guys know, it's kind of an end user computing devices, like a virtual machines for the end users, right? So started off with maybe a couple of hundreds, and then now we have close to 3,000 workspaces in our environment. There are three major families, I would say. There are others, but what we go do is personal workspaces. We are looking into a POC, POV of workspaces pool, but we also use secure browser. So the reason why we use secure browser, it's kind of a browser, doesn't allow user to do anything else other than do access URLs, right? So if there could be use cases in your environment where some line of business just access some applications, do a bunch of different things with it, and go from there. So that's a very good use case. We introduced that at least a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago, which got some good savings. Rather than exposing to a persistent device like a personal workspace, we used secure browser as one of the family item that was available under Workspace. Okay, so and then, like I said, we are working on this newly. I think this Workspaces pool got released in last November, if I'm correct. We are working through that, and we do have some use cases coming up that we are planning to use, which is kind of a very similar to personal workspace, but it's not persistent, correct? So it's like as the users log off, and then when they, after like a couple of hours, or when they log in on the next shift, they get a new workspace. Like it provides all the security features built in, so people cannot use a persistent device, stay with it, and stuff like that. So but what I can add on the personal workspaces, our use cases was, I think we have business analysts. I do have a few things, notes here with me, call centers, data processors, developers, financial folks, in IT folks, and some office workspaces. Okay, so those are all the major groups these 3,000 consist of. Next slide, please, Manish. And geographically, the users who are using these workspaces are in various different world, but primarily in India and Philippines. So one of the things that we saw was Philippines user connecting to US, particularly North Virginia, which is our primary region, was having the speed of light, right? So users connecting from India to, or Philippines to North Virginia, it was around maybe more than 250 milliseconds. So that was a challenge connecting to a workspace. So we moved some of those to US West. So Philippines have shorter connectivity there, and then they have better experience. But the rest of the folks are in US, and they are they are connecting. Most of them are connecting from India. So and there were some latency issues which we worked on for several years. Going through. I don't know how much technical I need to go here, but I can a little bit. Workspaces has two different protocols. So where it streams PC over IP and WSP. Okay, so initially it was both, given options for both. WSP is a homegrown, and correct me, Manish or AWS folks, if I'm wrong. PC over IP was kind of transition from a generic one. So the PC over IP had high latency stuff, or WSP had a little bit. Okay, you can tolerate more latency. But one of the challenge that we had was, okay, even though that's the case, it all depends on the user location. It's kind of a source and destination and the path, right? And the user were in India or Philippines, then the workspace was in US, East or the West. Which one is the best? So then we figured out Philippines works better, correct? Still, we were having some hiccups with it, so where, okay, they were kind of touching the 250 mark. And that's where I believe the next slide, maybe, do we cover that, Manish, on the next slide, or we need to go through?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, so we were challenged. We were having some challenges even with the newer WSP protocol, correct? So and then we were saying, okay, yes, it works for certain users, but it doesn't. And then that's where AWS introduced, I think 8 months ago or 10 months ago, called AWS Global Accelerator. It's kind of a free service associated to Workspace, and we can enable it only through for the WSP workspaces. Okay, so we did that, and that really made a significant difference of folks connecting to the workspace. So a couple of settings tweaks that we had to do, but the rest, so it looked very well. It worked very well, with respect to the RTT. So that significantly reduced the latency, right? The end user experience is what really matters. They're trying to access the workspace, they couldn't. And they tried to use applications, they couldn't. And it works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes. We can tell, okay, your RTT is high, but as you guys may know, Workspace is a public endpoint. So wherever the end user leaves their network, we don't have any control how they get to it. So, but this was kind of a saving feature AWS released from my perspective, where it really put them into a healthy round trip time, and then made the user experience much more pleasant. So thanks to AWS on that. And also, we found out during some of those investigations, we were also see that some workspaces are running out of disk space, and we want to monitor these things a little better. We have 3,000. We don't want to enable alarms for every end user computing. Like end user computing, I use a laptop. I don't have, like, if my memory goes down, it doesn't send a notification to our service desk. So we don't want to do that level, but we can. So I think 10 months ago, there were some good metrics that AWS allowed us that really helped investigate some of these groups who are having some issues, go through finer details. If it's a disk, then we have some mechanism to clean it up automatically. Or if something else, then we can showcase what the issue is and resolve quickly. So that was something that I wanted to share with you guys. If you guys use Workspace, WSP, I believe Windows 11 will use only WSP. So with the AGA enabled, that's really useful. And also some additional metrics for monitoring workspaces is really useful as well. Next slide, please. So this is another one, right? That's for performance of a workspace. But for everything to work appropriately, we also want to cost optimize it, correct? So this is one thing that is also available from AWS, which is called Workspace Cost Optimizer, if I am correct. Okay, so it's a service that you can enable, and then it will monitor the usage of a workspace. On a personal workspace, there are like two different modes. It can be always on, means like, okay, there is a user who's like, we're working 8 hours, 10 hours a day. They use it significantly longer than a typical use cases, but you don't want to charge for every hour, right? So it switches to like an always on mode, meaning it's a fixed bill. So you know, even though they use more than a certain amount, they, they they get a fixed bill. But there is a flip side to it, correct? There are users, like there are several use cases where it's not just the end user or the call center folks or stuff like that, but there are supervisors, managers, and the testers where they log in and test few things. They don't need workspaces to be on always on mode. It can go to a auto stop, meaning they use it. If they don't use it for a while, then it will go to an auto stop mode, which will save cost. But the workspace will be readily available. This was a significant feature that we enabled in our environment, which really saved a considerable cost overall. And the cool thing is, you switch it off, turn it on, you don't have to do much with it. Just monitor that this cost optimizer is running, supposed to run, then you don't have to do anything. It will do an auto switch for you behind the scene, and then then our SLTs and stuff like that will be extremely happy. Okay, the people are using it, and you're also um, saving the cost, right? So this is another one that if you guys are not aware, I will encourage using it. Next slide, please. And thank you. So these were significant things that we did in the last few months, and particularly I want to thank Manish, who was excellent in working us go through some of these challenges, and even that's where we need to tap into these TAMs and senior TAMs, right? So that they can escalate certain things and then bring in right resources to help us out. So I thank Manish for it, and Manish, if you can go through your slide.
Yeah, thanks, Shiva. Thanks for your kind words there. Definitely, it's a partnership, and we relish that partnership here. Uh, Moving along, from the success we had from the cost optimizer, the workspace cost optimizer, the Enlyte leadership leaned upon us to go ahead and realize more cost savings, right? So they looked at the benefits the cost optimizer was bringing in, and they leaned upon us to go ahead and realize more benefits and more cost optimization that they wanted us to go ahead and find out, right? So what we started was we started looking at various usual options. So we started evaluating all the usual options in here, and then the oops. Okay, all right. So the usual options that we evaluated were like the savings plans and the reserved instances, right? We looked at the savings plan and the reserved instance. The utilizations were pretty good, around about at 100%. I mean, there were no other ways to go ahead and purchase additional savings plans and reserved instance. The coverage was up to the mark, right? Uh, Other opportunities that we looked into was right sizing the compute, right? That was one of the opportunities that usually shows up as a cost optimization initiative. We looked at that as well. Supposedly Enlyte had it covered, and we had some opportunity, but not a lot, not worth putting an effort in there. Ideal databases, that was another thing that we looked into, right, all across the organization. So those were already optimized, so not a lot of opportunity there as well. And CloudTrail, another that is an interesting one, because usually what happens is like usually the CloudTrail first copy is free, but for some organizations you end up enabling the CloudTrail, and usually you pay for the second copy, right? But essentially it's of no use. So that was another thing that we looked into, but it wasn't much help. So we looked at all of these four options, and we could not find much savings or much relations, cost savings opportunities there. That prompted us to think in differently, right? And so what happened was we went ahead and came up with this unique approach that we wanted to go ahead and highlight in there, right? The approach was mostly around the environment and the invoice driven, right? In a way that we looked at the environment from various like production, non-production wise, and we started looking at diving into details of it, right? So we started looking at all the AWS accounts that Enlyte had, and we started looking the prod and the non-prod account. We started segregating all those accounts. Now, when we started doing the segregation, we start in the non-prod account, we started looking at the various services that were consumed. Two of the services which got flagged was the storage snapshot, which was approximately 25% of the cost for non-prod environments when we consider overall storage cost that was being taken, right? So the question that we had right at that point of time, and this is still under deliberations, is do we really need that much? Do we really need it, right? 25% of the cost of the overall snapshot is going towards non-prod, and since it's a non-prod environment, do we really need it, right? That was the question that we asked ourselves, and we're still deliberating that. And the next thing that we started thinking along is what can we do about it, right? Can we go ahead and implement better tagging policies, right? So that we go ahead, we know that these are the specific tags needs to have the snapshot taken, and others we can do away with. So those are the things that are still under deliberations, and that is something that we're looking at this point of time. Another thing that we looked into was the database on the database backup side, right? We also saw like 25% of the database backup side was being used for non-prod environments as well, right? Now the same question comes into the mind, right? I mean, do we really need it, right? Because since it's the non-prod environments, how often we're using it, do we really need that kind of a backup? Can we play around with the adjust retention policies that we have here? Specifically, if it's a 30-day retention, can we go back to 7-day, basically? Or on cases, extreme cases, can we do a 1-day retention policy, right? Those are the things that we started looking into, and we are still deliberating on that, so we can go ahead and realize those cost savings. So those are the different, this one of the approach that we used on an environment basis. The second one was we started looking at the billing invoice, right? And once we started looking at that invoice, we went ahead and did analysis on various domains. One of the things that caught our eye was the FSX section of it, right? Supposedly, while doing the FSX analysis, we saw that the FSX for ONTOP had the storage and the compression, storage and deduplication disabled, right? Uh, what this meant was enabling this option would lead us to a 60% savings directly on the whatever the cost that we are having. Similar what we found out for FSX for window, that it has deduplication disabled as well, right? Enabling this option would bring in additional 50% saving just on the FSX. And the Enlyte is a big user on FSX. So these are the different, like one was the invoice driven approach, next was on the environment driven approach. These are the two things. Like now something recently has come up for non-prod environment. We started looking at metrics like multi-AZ. Do we really need a multi-AZ environment for a non-prod environment, right? So those are the things that we are looking into, and we're trying to go ahead and realize those savings. FSX savings are already in progress. The environment one is still under deliberation, and how do we go ahead and implement it? Maybe using an SCPs for the storage and for database, checking with the required teams and getting an alignment on that. So yeah, those are the two the cost optimization stories that I wanted to share on that. Then moving on, like obviously we have this feedback, so feel free to fill that out, and I'll pause in for questions from your end.
Thank you, Manish. I know Shiva had to drop off there. I had a few questions there. I'll start off. As Taryn mentioned, these are great user journeys. Always, I look forward to the workspaces stories there. Was security the key driver for them to go to workspaces? Usually, when we talk about in 2025, most of them are web services or web apps, so to speak, there. Do they have any legacy apps that prompted them to go with workspaces?
Yeah, I mean, they have few legacy apps installed, and remember, these users we are talking about mostly from India and Philippines, right? So they needed something very secure. So the end-to-end basically security protocols needs to be there in place, and that's the solution that we're looking at. And Enlyte is all AWS, so they wanted to something with AWS native as one of the solutions. The security was an additional factor that was considered as well.
I see. So is this going to be their end goal to have everybody on Workspaces, or is this a migration journey or on their modernization effort to go from the legacy apps to modernizing all their apps?
Yeah, so most of the users, Enlight users, are already on Workspaces, and as soon as like they're bringing on new users, they are going ahead and rolling out Workspaces for them. With the successes that they have with the AGA, right, and the user experience, that's made them more comfortable to go ahead and roll out for even for the new users.
And it wasn't evident there, but I didn't hear as to where the workspaces are spread. Are they local to the region, where, like you said, Philippines and India, or
Yeah,
all the workspaces hosted in name?
yeah, that's a good question. So initially, when they started the journey, right, all of their workspaces are hosted out of like US East 1. The reason that they had was they wanted to be more closer to their workloads. That was the initial understanding. But now, of late, the POCs and there have been proof of concepts have been done coming out of Singapore and Mumbai locations, where they're seeing that they will be having much better experience if they start having those users based out of Mumbai and Singapore region. Specifically, like it's more of a physics thing, basically, right? You're closer to that location, so you'll have a much better experience. But initial understanding when they started, they had everybody on US East 1, and then the latency issues which we talked about, right? It was more of a physics thing. I mean, the user reaching out from India location to US East 1, it was a physics problem rather than more of a workspace problem. AGA helped definitely, but I think the best solution would be having those users based out of Mumbai and Singapore region, right, to have an effective workspace experience.
Thank you. There is a question from Taryn here. Are these SAML or SSO enabled from an authentication perspective, from a user authentication experience perspective?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Good. Anyone has any further questions for Manish or the Enlight team? We can upstream those questions to Shiva there. Okay, I have one closing question. When you mentioned about spreading the workload or the proximity to where the users are are the workloads all currently in US regions? When we say application is hosted here, your workspace is hosted closer to the user, but still they have to do the round trip there. Is the plan to really expand their applications as well to various regions?
Right. So the idea here was right. I mean, when the users today connect, right, they log in from India. I mean, before AGA, to or India or Philippines, they directly go ahead and log into US East 1, right? So that's a long trip time and that's why latency issues. What AGA did was using those POPs, right, based out of, say, for example, for Hyderabad, they were going ahead utilizing the AGA to improve the user experience, right? Now, once they would be supposedly, once the POC is complete and once they would be on a Mumbai location, for example, right, the idea would be like they would be, once they are inside workspace, they would be using the internal network, right, to go ahead and get into the application. So that shouldn't, once they're inside AWS, right, it's much easier to go ahead and navigate and access the applications. It's just the last mile delivery that they're talking about. That's what the challenge is, and that's why we're trying to address that through AGA.
I see. Um, Shiva mentioned something about going from 250 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds there. Do we have any insight into their observability platform? How are they measuring it? This is not a app they're measuring from a web app perspective there. From a workspaces side of things, their end-to-end user experience monitoring. Uh, are they leaning on any of the AWS tools? Are there third-party tools? Uh, can you do you have any insight or can you share that?
Yeah, I do have some insights. Yeah. So they're using CloudWatch alarms basically on the RTT side, right? Anytime a user exceeds that threshold, basically alarm gets triggered, right? And those are the ways that they are going ahead and using. So it's mostly cloud what they're utilizing, even for like using those disk space issues that we're seeing. Now the proper alarms has been put up, right? So as soon as those thresholds, say for example, an 80% threshold has passed on, right? Those gets flagged, and then the EUC team jumps in basically from Enlight size to do the investigation, right? If the cleanup has been done or not, and accordingly they take action. Cool. Should there any other questions for me?
Thank you, Manish. I don't see any other raised hands or questions there. So if anybody from the audience needs to ask, please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask Manish or the Enlight team.
I guess I have one last question off mute since I've talked enough in chat. Just a quick question. Was there any use cases around from a security perspective to manage the devices? A lot of customers I've worked with in the past are looking into using some kind of MDM or solution, but they have ran into issues where whether it's installing CloudStrike or other security components with their imaging process, they've ran into issues with there. So do they have any issues with around this, or are they is this one of their pieces around that they need for their technical stack for their
Yeah,
customers?
yeah. So I think they have their BUs, right, and they cater to they have various business units and they cater to those business units. But I mean, essentially, what they do is they build out those images and roll it out to their BUs, right? And CrowdStrike is one of the things that they and uh, to some extent, right? Initially, we saw that as and we tried to investigate that angle as well as when we're having those latency issues, but nothing came out from there. It was mostly like the disks part of it, basically. Yeah.
Good. That's good to hear. A lot of people get stuck on that imaging process, especially around CloudStrike and benchmarking and doing all that from an imaging standpoint. So sounds like they got through that pretty well and were well on the way with the rest of the latency process. So good win.